Hi folks, I'm Dean Curry. Welcome again to Fantasy Football RSVP Waiver Wire Week 10. Yeah, let's get started. Okay, we have the waiver wire for Week 10. The YouTube channel here is Fantasy Football RSVP. Subscribe. Every week we're going to come back with more and more information, and we're going to make sure you stay up to the date. You'll get the best fantasy advice going, and we'll make sure that you win your league. Let's get right to it. We're talking about Waiver Wire 10 right here in 2018. The best probably player out there right now to get is Ito Smith. Not Ito Smith, Duke Johnson. Pardon me. Duke Johnson would Ito Smith we're going to talk about in a little bit, but Duke Johnson has been reborn. And right now, you got to get him on your team because Coach Williams, the new coach for the Cleveland Browns, he basically sent a message yesterday that he is going to showcase, Duke Johnson. I think he had six receptions or 6 pass attempts in the first half alone. And that's one of the reasons why they actually got rid of their head coach and offensive coordinator, because Duke Johnson was a big part of this team last year, and they didn't have a good attack. Landry's not getting the ball. Baker Mayfield looks lost, in the offense. And Haley is a great offensive coach, but he's also, he had Ben Roethlisberger. I mean, this guy really has a complicated offense, and I really feel what they want to establish on the Cleveland Browns is short passes to Duke Johnson. They also want to get David Njoku more involved, and although he didn't have a big game last week, he did have a couple of big catches for scores. And they were trying to throw the ball to him. And that's what Cleveland wants to do. And Williams is an old school coach. He wants a balanced attack. He wants to throw to the tight end. He wants to throw to the slot back coming out of the backfield, because that will open things up for Landry, because right now Landry is getting double teamed. I've even seen him get triple teamed on numerous occasions because they have no other options. So teams are really loading up on that. And once, Chubb, their running back, starts getting going, and Baker Mayfield feels more comfortable, and he's actually been feeling a lot more comfortable lately. His fantasy numbers are actually going up. He actually might be a sneaky play in the coming weeks at quarterback because his quarterback rating the last couple of weeks is almost 100. And his fantasy numbers are going up. And when he starts running the ball a little bit as quarterback, Bradley Chubb is starting to establish himself. Now you have Duke Johnson coming out of the backfield. You start hitting your tight end, Njoku. In Callaway, Bratley, their wide receivers are getting a little bit better. It's going to take some of the attention away from Landry, and Landry's actually going to get more play. And, he should do really, really well. So Duke Johnson, I think, is going to be putting up big fantasy numbers in the weeks to come. I really believe that. He may get a few carries here and there, but he's going to be good for 5 or 6 or 7, catches a week, anywhere from 50 to 80 yards, just like last week, because they really want that balanced attack, and that's why those guys got fired. So Duke Johnson, get him on your team. He could be a really nice play in these closing weeks of the fantasy football season. And before we get more into the waiver wire, let me just explain a couple of things. I myself belong. I'm in a bunch of leagues, over half a dozen, 7 or 8 leagues, I think. You know, there many of those leagues I'm doing really well. I'm right at the top, in a position for a playoff. One of the leagues, a couple of weird things happened. I was putting up 130, 135, 140 points and still losing. And usually you put close to 140 points and you're usually going to get wins at 140. One week I think I had almost 150 and I lost. But that happens. It's just I got outpointed during those weeks, and now I'm fighting for a playoff spot in one of the leagues that I'm in. Don't get discouraged. These things happen. I shared a story not too long ago about a friend that I knew that literally one year, and this is a guy who plays fantasy football. He's smart. Okay, he knows his stuff, and he's won his league many times. And, I ran into him not too long ago, and he told me he was, 0-12 last year, meaning 0 wins and 12 losses. And, he basically was getting outpointed. I mean, there was a bunch of losses he had by a few points, and it just seemed that every time a player played him, that was like the one week they put up like a huge score, and he had 0 wins and 12 losses, and he was so discouraged. And this guy knows his stuff. A couple of injuries hit his team, and a couple of bad breaks, some close wins, and then it was just like a downward spiral. It doesn't mean he doesn't know fantasy football, So you have to understand that in fantasy football, sometimes things just are not going to go your way, and you're not going to make the playoffs. And it happens to the best of them. It's never happened to me, believe it or not. But one of the leagues I'm in this year, there's a chance that might happen. But I've always made the top 4 for the playoffs. But now there's one out of like 8 leagues where I'm killing it in every league. In this one league, it's going to be tough. I'm going to have to run the table. But those things happen, and sometimes you just get weird things happen. Sometimes you made the right moves, but they just didn't work out for some reason, and but they were the right moves at the time. So don't, take it personally. I know people take this so serious, but it happens. There's going to be times where no matter what you do, it's just not going to work. I mentioned Ito Smith for the waiver wire before. The reason why I want you to focus on Ito Smith, I'm not saying necessarily play him, but this is week 10. We're getting towards the close of the fantasy football season, and Coleman, their other running back, because Freeman is injured on the Falcons, he's in a contract year, and that basically means he's at the end of a 3-year contract, and they're not going to re-sign him because they don't want to pay him, and he's going to demand a lot. And they have Freeman, and I don't think they're going to be in the playoffs. It's going to be really hard for the Falcons with their current record, because they have a losing record right now, to make the playoffs, especially in the West. It's going to be very difficult. And when they start getting towards playing more and more meaningless games as the year goes on, they're really going to want, and I mentioned this in the waiver wire edition last week, they're going to want to really see what's going on with Ito Smith, because they're going to want to use him next year. And Coleman's going to get less and less touches, and it's already happening. It seems like Ito Smith is getting 1 or 2 or 3 more touches every single week. Coleman's still out touching him, but it's getting close to half. And that trend is going to continue. So I'm not saying necessarily play Ito Smith, but I would definitely stash him if you have room on your bench, because he's actually going to be a good play when you need him, especially, I think, come the fantasy playoffs. So if you have room on your bench, put him on there. Another good person to have on your team, Dante Foreman. You really want to pick him up if he's available, because Lamar Miller and Alfred Blue. I mean, basically the Texans have won 5 games in a row, and they have like no running game. Miller had 1 good week, or something like 1.5 good weeks. It's just not reliable. And Foreman is actually going to start practicing full this week, which means he may not necessarily play this week. He may, but he's going to be practicing with the team. And, he really took over that position last week. And I think they're taking their time with him. I think he's further along than they're letting on. They want to make sure, he's really, really healthy and ready to go. And if the Texans get a running game, now they have Demaryius Thomas, which is an upgrade, in my opinion, from Fuller. And Fuller's a good player, but I just like the possession Demaryius Thomas. He's a big back. He's almost like a tight end out there. And he creates a lot of physical problems in matchups for cornerbacks and secondary. And when you have a physical, like a Brandon Marshall type back in the day, bruising wide receiver like that, they usually have to put more than one guy on him. And it's going to open things up for... Expect Hopkins' numbers to go up with Demaryius Thomas there. I mean, Fuller's a nice receiver, but he's sort of like the same as, Hopkins, But Demaryius Thomas is a different kind of wide receiver. It's a physical wide receiver. It's not just that he can catch the ball, but it's what he could do once he catches the ball. He could out-physical you. And he's not easy to tackle. And it makes people create more attention towards him. So when they get D'Onta Foreman back and solidify a running game, and now Demaryius Thomas will probably get more attention than even Fuller did, it's going to really open things up for that team. And I think the addition of Demaryius Thomas is going to open up their running game, because he's a physical wide receiver and he's going to demand more attention, which should open things up. An outside sleeper for running back, I'm not crazy about this pick, but I'm going to mention it. He's been pretty consistent with fantasy numbers, would probably be Jalen Richard. Like I said, I'm not crazy about this pick, but he has been pretty consistent as far as fantasy numbers, and Derek Carr likes to throw the ball to him. And, this guy on a consistent basis has been giving you 5 catches, 50, 60 yards every week. And if you throw in a potential touchdown, if you have no other play and you need to fill in, I would maybe roster him as an emergency spot. Let's go to wide receivers. I would look at Adam Humphries for the Bucs. They seem to really be everyone's talking about Godwin. I mean, what did Humphries have? 2 touchdowns last game, 8 targets and 8 receptions and 82 yards. And it just looked like Fitzpatrick just wants to throw to this guy. The last couple of weeks, he's a slot receiver. Cooper Kupp, Thielen, it's a slot receiver league. You want to have good slot receivers on your team, and this guy's a good one, not a good Godwin. This guy's a good one, a very good one. You want to perhaps have him on your team. it looked like Fitzpatrick wanted to throw to this guy more than he wanted to throw to Evans. And Fitzmagic is only, I think he's going to play the rest of the season at quarterback. I mean, it's a risk, but it's a risk worth taking. I wanted to play him this week. I had Cousins and Fitzmagic. I was going to play Fitzmagic. I mean, I just didn't like the matchup. I mean, I'm humble. I'll tell you when I get him right and when I don't. I picked up Fitzmagic on the waiver wire. I just didn't like his matchup against the Carolina Panthers because they have a really good defense, and they also run the ball a lot, and they are a ball control offense. They like those long drives, and I was just, afraid that Fitzmagic would not be on the field enough to put up good numbers, and they're a much better team, the Panthers, than the Bucks. And Cousins was highly ranked. He had a terrific matchup, playing against the soft defense, Saints, and I just he had a very soft defense, and I just thought it would be a really good matchup for Cousins this past week. And I'm always hesitant with Cousins for a few reasons. I'll tell you why. They last year, Keenan they had on the Vikings, and he had a good fantasy year. He's with the Broncos now. He had a good fantasy year, and I really thought, a lot of people thought, bringing Cousins into the Vikings, and I don't play Cousins a lot in fantasy football a lot of times. Not to say he's bad, but he puts up those weeks like he did this past week. We had a terrific matchup against a soft defense, and he put up what in my league, 8 fantasy points or 10 fantasy points. I mean, he just, and they ran the ball a lot, and it was a ball control game, and it's just typical. I mean, I've had him on my team. I have a couple of quarterbacks on my team. I have Wentz. I just picked up Fitzmagic. Normally I don't carry more than 2, but I like some of the matchups. But, Cousins let me down. And a part of me, wanted to pull the trigger on Fitzmagic, but the right call was to play Cousins over Fitzmagic. Unfortunately, Fitzmagic had a huge day. And I was right there about to pull that trigger and not even pay attention to the matchup. Because I just know with Cousins, they say, once Cousins goes to this team from the Redskins, he's going to be a different type of quarterback. He never really had the wide receivers, and I've been watching this guy forever, and Cousins is Cousins, and he just proved it again this past week. Keenan had a better year last year with that team, fantasy-wise. So, sometimes you just got to trust your instincts. 9 times out of 10, I'm right on that. Like I said, I almost pulled the trigger on Fitzpatrick. I should have trusted my instincts, and I'll be starting them probably this week. Although I have Wentz too, so Wentz is probably a better matchup. But anyway, it's just something to think about, to always trust your instincts. And I really like this Adam Humphries pick, and if you could get him on your roster, you might want to consider doing that, and you might want to pick, I doubt at this point Fitzmagic is even around, but if he's around, definitely pick him up. He's got some good matchups coming up, I think in weeks 10, 11 and 12, 10 and 12. Yeah, so you might want to consider doing that. And a couple of other weeks. I think he's got the Giants defense. That's definitely a big game coming up. So see if you could get Fitzmagic. See if you could get Adam Humphries. Another person you might want to consider rostering is Ryan Grant for the Colts. Luck loves him, loves throwing to him, and he's been injured, like a little leg injury. But they're coming off a bye. He was almost ready to return before the bye, so he should be ready to return. And they're not getting much production out of Hilton, who was injured. Chester Rogers has been doing really nothing other than a week or two. And Ryan Grant, he might be a real sneaky guy that a lot of people are not paying attention to. I mean, he's in all my leagues, he's available. Well, not in all my leagues because he's on my team now, but he was available up until very recently. So you want to put him on your team. Another people are talking about Valdez-Scantling for Green Bay. Here's my opinion. Yes, it looks like Aaron Rodgers is starting to throw to him, but Geronimo Allison has been injured. Randall Cobb has been injured. They're both kind of getting back to playing, and Aaron Rodgers, the only reliable player, in my opinion, to play on the Green Bay Packers, because of the way they run their offense, is Aaron Rodgers or their star Adams, their star wide receiver. You want to consider, other than that, their coaching staff, Courtney, they just like to spread the ball around too much. And now Valdez-Scantling, 1 week it's going to be him, 1 week it's going to be Cobb, 1 week it's going to be Geronimo Allison or St. Pierre. You can't even play Aaron Jones because they're going from Adams to Aaron Jones. And this guy he's a coach that likes to spread the ball around. It's very difficult, very much like the Eagles' offense, outside of maybe Jeffrey and Ertz. It's very hard to predict with that spread the ball around offense who to play in fantasy. And you don't want to play guessing games in fantasy football. You're better off having less numbers from a fantasy player, but consistent numbers. You're better off, having a player on your team that's going to get you 10 low double-digit points, but every single week he's going to get you a 10 or a 12, 10 or a 12 every single week, then taking a chance on, someone that's going to give you 21 week and then like 5 or 4 points the next week. Because that's how you lose fantasy football, you got to get your numbers. You have players on your team that put up a 3 or 4, it's almost guaranteed loss. So you got to be really careful, regarding, that. And as far as Valdez-Scantling, a lot of people are bringing him up this week. I would seriously consider not picking him up. 2 players on the same team you may want to, a sneaky player might be Cole Beasley. I'm not big on playing receivers from Dallas, but they had no other options, and Cole Beasley was getting double teamed a lot, believe it or not. And now that they have Amari Cooper, that's going to open things up for Zeke more. The Cowboys' offensive line has been getting healthier and healthier as the year goes on. A lot of guys have been out all year, and they're starting to get things together. Amari Cooper will stretch the field, but he'll also demand a lot of attention, which is probably going to open things up more for Cole Beasley. Those short little passes over the middle, like slot receiver type guys, have been doing so well. And I think Amari Cooper, I'm not saying he's going to have huge fantasy points, but, being Amari Cooper, he's going to demand a lot of attention. It's going to open things up for Zeke Elliott with a ever-improving offensive line. And Cole Beasley, if he's available, he's one of those guys that will get you low double-digit scores, but every week he's going to get you 10, 12, 14, 10, 12, 14. He may not get 20 or 25. He might have weeks like that, but he's always going to get you points. He's reliable. Another couple of players you might want to look at is the 49ers with Pierre Garçon and Marcus Goodwin. I know Goodwin hasn't been doing great fantasy-wise, nor has Garçon, but I watched that game last week with Mullins. That guy looked amazing, and he broke like a lot of Brett Favre's records in college. I mean, I looked up his college stats. Pretty impressive, and this guy looked amazing on Monday night. I watched the game. He looked poised. He looked amazing. He looked like, I mean, this is I mean, Thursday night football, but it's prime time, And he looked absolutely amazing, and it looked like he really wanted to throw to Garçon. And what people don't realize about Marcus Goodwin is he was poised to have a huge year this year. He has a hamstring. A lot of his game is his speed and his quickness, and he's still trying to nurse himself back from a hamstring. But I've seen a couple of plays with him when he's been out there the last couple of weeks, and it looks like he's starting to get his quickness back. And if he does, those two are two players you want to keep an eye on, whether it's going to be Garçon or Goodwin, because I'm not saying start them now, but they might be a good stash for a week or two to see if they develop, because this guy, Mullen, I mean, you might want to pick him up too. Although I would be careful about playing him because he's got some really hard matchups coming up, which could be bad, but could also be good, because sometimes when teams are playing really tough matchups, sometimes they're behind by 2 or 3 touchdowns, and that is a fantastic recipe for fantasy football, because then they're playing from behind and they just air it out the rest of the game, trying to catch up. So he might be a sneaky quarterback play. As far as tight end, that's it for wide receivers. As far as tight ends, we'll go through this pretty quickly. If Jack Doyle is available, I would consider picking up Jack Doyle. Believe it or not, he was available on my waiver wire in a bunch of my leagues. And I picked him up because Andrew Luck loves throwing to him. He loves throwing to Ebron too, but, he likes using both of them. And the nice part about Doyle is more the dump-off guy he likes to throw to. Ebron stretches the field a little bit more. So the dump-off guy is what you want. And I'm telling you, if Jack Doyle is available and tight ends are hard to find, definitely pick him up. Because you want to consider doing that, because he's a possession type of receiver. He's one of those guys that's going to get you low and double-digit points every single week, instead of playing like a Jimmy Graham, who last week, he has a good week and a touchdown, and then the week before he puts up a 1. Because it's that Green Bay offense where they spread the ball. Believe it or not, I actually dropped Jimmy Graham for Jack Doyle. Austin Hooper may actually be someone you want to watch. I'm not saying definitely play him, but I've been noticing that he's been really coming on lately. I don't know if all of you watch the games. I like to actually not just watch the highlights, red zone or whatever. I actually like to watch a lot of the games too when I have time, because there was a bunch of plays where Austin Hooper was targeted, and Matty Ice just missed him, and he could have had even bigger days. And it looks like he's trusting him more, and it's what Austin Hooper could do after he catches the ball. He's really physical out there. He's not going to necessarily run away from you, but he'll run over you. And he's someone you might want to monitor. His production believe it or not, sometimes tends to go up come playoff time. I don't know if you remember, he's had some great playoffs. Not fantasy playoffs, but the actual playoffs, where his numbers just climbed. And towards the end of the season, I've seen his numbers climb before. Someone you want to look at. It may be good to stash Vernon Davis if he's available, because Reed gets injured all the time, and if he goes down, Vernon Davis is going to have huge fantasy relevance. He actually has fantasy relevance already, but Reed gets injured. I mean, that guy gets injured going to the water fountain. He wakes up in the morning, he's like, I pulled my hamstring. I mean, so it might be a smart play to hold him. As far as quarterbacks, I mentioned Mullins, I mentioned Fitzmagic. Baker Mayfield, you might want to monitor him. His numbers are climbing in fantasy. I'm not saying necessarily start him, but his numbers are starting to climb. A sneaky play this week actually may be a player I rarely play in fantasy football, but you shouldn't have that attitude like, I don't play this guy, because sometimes it's an opportunity. You have Alex Smith, who I never play in fantasy, and if I ever did play him, it's the 1 week he puts up like nothing. But he is going up against Tampa Bay, their defense, which is, in my opinion, the worst in the NFL. And it may be actually a sneaky play this week. If you're desperate for a win and your quarterback's on a bye, or, it's a terrible matchup for your quarterback, and again, I say this with a little bit of hesitancy, but there's a chance he could have a big fantasy week against Tampa Bay, which basically anyone who's playing Tampa Bay is having a great fantasy week. So if you're desperate, you might want to consider doing that. Along with their kicker, Dustin Hopkins. If you need a kicker this week on a bye, he had 2 points last week because they just had two touchdowns, but Dustin Hopkins has been putting up double-digit numbers every single week because the Washington Redskins have been having a hard time getting in the end zone. They have a good offense, and they have a good defense. So that's a good recipe for a kicker, and they're actually going up against some really tough red zone offenses in the weeks to come. So if Dustin Hopkins is available and you're not getting production out of your kicker, you might want to consider picking him up, especially for this week, going against a really soft defense. I think the Redskins are going to put up a lot of points, field goals, maybe perhaps two. You may want to consider that, picking him up. As far as defenses, I would consider picking up the Jets defense. I'm sure if you could pick up the Chargers defense, they have a good matchup this week too, but the Jets defense is going up against the Bills with Peterman, and I just played the Bears defense against the Bills, and they put up 29 fantasy points. In fact, I've been streaming every team against the Bills and been putting up, crazy points, because, they're having a hard time. And Peterman is just giving up pick sixes like they're going, out of style. They're just every week. So you might want to consider if the Jets defense, which actually has been doing well fantasy-wise, their team may not be good, but they've been putting up decent fantasy numbers on defense. I would pick up the Jets defense if you have no other play against the Bills, and I'm pretty sure the Jets defense is going to be available on your waiver wire. So you might want to consider doing that too. So this is waiver wire week 10 for your fantasy advice. I hope I've given you great insight. Subscribe to our channel, Fantasy Football RSVP, on YouTube, and post a comment, and I will try to get back to you, or my man Jeff Ice or Curry, I go by Curry. You could call me Curry, Dean Curry. And Jeff Ice goes by Ice. Ice will be joining us for the Curry and Ice show on our podcast on messy.fm. You could just go to our YouTube channel, and on the top right, there are links, hyperlinks, icons that you could hit for all of our podcasts, and our YouTube channel, of course, our Instagram account, our Twitter account, website is under construction, building. We're trying to make it official and really interactive, so that's getting done. But and our fantasy also on our Facebook business page, Fantasy Football RSVP. You could like us, and it's a chat room. You could ask us chat advice on your lineup, and we'll try to get back to you. A lot of these things were under Fantasy Football RSVP is new. Been doing this for a long time, but a lot of these forums are brand new. So sign up. We're building the community under Fantasy Football RSVP, and it's going to be really fantastic. And you could be part of the community, and we could have a lot of fun doing it and interact and talk about fantasy football. So I wish you all a great day. I'll probably release another video this week on trading in week 10, and just strategy, getting ready for the playoffs so you could win your league. This is Dean Curry, and Jeff Ice will be joining us next week. And I wish you all the best, and stay tuned for more on Fantasy Football RSVP.